it's Elizabeth here. In this video, I want to talk about strategies for resolving conflict on project teams, specifically using the Thomas Kilmann Instrument, which is a way of thinking about and responding to conflict. I'm sure it's not the only conflict strategy tool that is out there, but it's one that I know. I think it's very good. I think it's very solid, and you can learn a lot of the basic concepts of it without having to get accredited or to do any psychometric testing. So it's a very accessible way to think about managing conflict on teams. It's also very Googleable as well, if that's the word. Thomas Kilmann Instrument, or we can call it TKI, and you can find out a lot of information about it. As you can imagine, it was put together by Mr. Thomas and Mr. Kilmann back in 1974. So it's got it's been around a long time as well. The things I like about it are that you get a vocabulary that helps you describe the kind of response that you want to take to the conflict, and it also helps you identify your personal preferred style of dealing with conflict. You can do a questionnaire to find out what that style is, but you don't have to. I think you'll know. You will just know if you read through the different styles. You will know which is the one that you naturally gravitate to in work situations and in personal situations as well, because it's, conflict's conflict really, isn't it? Whether it's telling your kid they have to go to bed or telling a sponsor that their solution is ridiculous and will never work with what you've built. It's all the same kind of strategies that you'll be using to have those conversations. The basic fundamental principle of TKI is that it looks at think of a axis like this. It looks at two different approaches, aspects to managing conflict. First, it looks at assertiveness. So how assertive are you, or is the approach to managing and resolving the conflict? How far do you take your own concerns at the expense of others? And then it looks at cooperativeness. So how cooperative is the approach to getting a solution that is effective? Basically, how far are you prepared to go to satisfy the needs of the other person, the other party in the negotiations? So it forces you to think about the strategy you want to take, the approach you're going to deal with in an assertiveness and cooperativeness perspective. So what it breaks down to then is each of those different axes, cooperative and assertive, have different points that you can plot on it, which doing it without any graphics is quite difficult to show you. But basically you've got 5 different modes for addressing conflict. You can compete, you can accommodate, you can avoid, you can collaborate, and you can compromise. So let's do a quick overview of those different five options. Avoiding is pretty obvious. It's not a very assertive approach, and it's not a very cooperative approach either, because you don't actually do anything. You just avoid having the discussion. People often think this is a really bad approach, but it's not. It's perfectly acceptable in certain circumstances. So, for example, if you've got 2 colleagues, they are very angry about something, the correct thing to do would be to avoid having the conflict resolution discussion right then. Let them calm down, bring them both back on a different day where you can discuss the issue in a more calm way, where no one's going to punch each other, for example. So there are certain situations where it's just not appropriate to get into anything at that point, and you avoid it. Not a great long-term strategy, because these things bubble away under the surface, but in the heat of the moment, avoiding might be exactly the right thing to do. The next one is accommodating, which is pretty unassertive because you don't put your own ideas forward, but very cooperative because the other person gets exactly what they wanted. And accommodating is where you basically accommodate the other person's wishes, you get nothing, and they win. I know that we shouldn't really talk about the language of winning in a conflict situation, but as a shorthand, an accommodating strategy is where you get nothing, and they are the person who succeeds in the discussion. You might again think that's not a particularly great solution, but again, in the right circumstances, it can be perfect. It can be exactly what you need. For example, where it's just not worth winning the argument, where it's just not worth having, it's not worth your time or the business's time to have a massive protracted debate about it. So you could say, you asked for something to be designed in blue, but actually they've done it in a kind of this, teal colour. It's not perfect, but you can live with it. Do you ask them to go back? No, you just accommodate the fact that, they've designed it in the wrong colour. That's a poor example. But you can imagine that there are some situations where actually, can I take holiday next week? I've already organised for somebody to cover my work. It's inconvenient for me as a project manager, but yes, I'm not going to stop you from having your holiday, especially as you've already got cover. I'll just accommodate that. It's not worth having a fight about it. Just go. That kind of, there could be circumstances where, for the good of the project, you take one for the team and you accommodate. Okay, so that's that one. Competing is an assertive way of getting what you want, quite uncooperative, and it's also known as forcing. And if I describe it as forcing, you will have a clearer view about what I'm talking about. The competing mode for conflict resolution is very much, I've said it, you have to do it. A very assertive, directive-driven approach. Again, many people will say that's not how I work. I don't give orders like that. I'm not in charge of the team. That's not the culture of our organisation. Fine. But in the right circumstances, competing, forcing, can be exactly the right thing to do. Where there's a health and safety issue, for example, where there's a risk. You're not going to have a negotiation with someone when you know that there's a massive, great big block falling off a building. You're just going to grab them and force them out of the way. Coming with me now. That kind of thing. So there might be certain circumstances, a colleague is sick and you just have to tell them, I'm telling you, you need to go home. That kind of thing. It's not necessarily a massive, great big conflict. Excuse me. But it's something that you just have to get through. The fourth mode is collaborating, and this is a much more assertive and cooperative approach. Both parties ultimately get what they want. So this is your traditional win-win conflict scenario where you're having a negotiation, you're discussing, you're trying to get over the conflict. You collaborate to the point that you actually both end up with a solution that works for you both, and you get the outcome that you want perfectly. It is time consuming, it takes a lot of talking, it takes a lot of effort, and there might be circumstances where it's inappropriate to put that amount of effort and time into getting to a perfect solution, and it might be impossible to do anyway. But there also might be times where it is definitely worth getting to a point where you can collaborate towards resolving the conflict in a way that both parties feel very, very satisfied with the outcome. Finally, we've got compromising. And compromising is a little bit like collaborating, but it doesn't exactly get you exactly what you want. So the main difference between collaborating and compromising: collaborating, both parties end up with a solution that meets their needs exactly. Compromising is in real life far more realistic, and both parties give a little in order to get to a solution that is acceptable for them both. Both parties are making concessions. There's lots of talking, lots of negotiating, but you can get round or over the conflict because you're ending up with a solution to the problem where both parties feel satisfied. And that's really what you're hoping for. So those are the 5 different TKI, Thomas Kilmann, approaches to managing conflict. And as I've been talking about them, you've probably realised that you have a preferred style. Mine is avoiding. Obviously, as project managers, as managers in general, we can work across all the styles, and you can pick and choose the strategy or the approach that feels most relevant to you at any given moment, having an awareness of the options that are available to you. So I hope that's been useful. It's been a whistle-stop tour of conflict management strategies and the Thomas Kilmann Instrument, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye.